Okay, I'm going to be pointing to the structures and asking you the questions. So this is going to be a self-quiz for you. Feel free to pause along the way and practice naming and recalling the structures that you have to know for your practical on the digestive system. Okay, so identify this space. This space is called the oral cavity. Identify this space. This space is called the nasal cavity. Identify this entire structure. This entire structure is called the pharynx. Identify this specific area of the structure. This specific area of the structure is called the nasopharynx, behind the nasal cavity, nasopharynx. Identify this specific area. This specific area is called behind the oral cavity, the oropharynx. Identify this specific area. This specific area behind the larynx is called the laryngopharynx. Identify this structure. This structure is the esophagus. Identify this structure. This structure is the pharyngeal tonsil. Identify this structure. This structure is called the palatine tonsil. Identify this structure. This structure is the lingual tonsil. Identify these structures. These are the lips. Identify these structures. The teeth. Identify this structure. The tongue. Identify this structure right here. This is the hard palate. Identify this structure right here. The soft palate. Identify this structure. The uvula. Identify all of this structure right here. All of this is the larynx. This specific structure, the epiglottis. Identify this hole or this opening, the glottis. Okay. Identify this organ, the esophagus. Identify the organ, stomach. Identify the organ, small intestines. Identify the organ, large intestines. Identify the organ or gland, pancreas. Identify the organ or gland, spleen. Identify the structure, appendix. Identify this area, the rectum. Identify the hole, the anus. Identify this organ or gland, the liver. Identify this organ or gland, the gallbladder. Identify this specific area, cardia. Identify this specific area. Fundus. Identify this area. Body of the stomach. Identify this structure. Lesser curvature. Identify this structure. Greater curvature. Identify this specific area. Pylorus. Identify these wrinkles or folds, these structures. Rugae. Identify this structure here. Pyloric sphincter. Identify this specific area. Duodenum. Identify this specific area. Jejunum. Identify this specific area. Ileum. Identify this specific area. Cecum. Identify this structure. Ileocecal valve. Identify each of these structures. Haustra. Identify this specific area. Ascending colon. Identify this specific area. Transverse colon. Identify this specific area. Descending colon. Identify this specific area. Sigmoid colon. Identify this structure here and here. Internal anal sphincter. Identify this structure, the thicker one here. These are called your external anal sphincter. Identify this specific area. Head of the pancreas. Identify this specific area. Body of pancreas. Identify this specific area. Tail of pancreas. Identify this white structure. Pancreatic duct. And identify each of these little bubble structures. Pancreatic lobules. Identify this specific area. Right lobe. Identify this specific area. Left lobe. Identify this specific area. Quadrate lobe. Identify this specific area. Caudate lobe. Identify this white line structure right here. Falciform ligament. Identify this organ or gland. Gallbladder. Okay. Okay. Identify this organ. Liver. Identify this organ or gland. Gallbladder. Identify this organ or gland. Stomach. Identify this organ or gland. Small intestine. Identify this organ or gland. Large intestine. Identify this structure right here. Ileocecal valve. Identify this pocket area, this structure. The cecum. Identify each one of these little bubbles or pockets. Haustra. Okay, and if I take this out, sorry guys, falling everywhere. Okay, so going on the back, I'm turning it around. What is this structure? The appendix. Okay. What is this structure? Common hepatic duct. What is this structure? Cystic duct. Sorry, I said that wrong. I'm sorry. This is your common bile duct. So sorry. Common bile duct, cystic duct, right here. This is your common hepatic duct. And then these two right here, your left and right hepatic duct. So again, common bile duct, which will branch off into your cystic duct, and your common hepatic duct. The common hepatic duct will then branch off into the left and right hepatic ducts. This lobe, caudate lobe. This area, quadrate lobe. This area, right lobe. This area, left lobe. And this structure right here, falciform ligament. Okay. So what is the organ or gland depicted here? This organ or gland would be the liver. Identify this entire structure, or this entire structure. A liver lobule. Identify this center structure. Central vein. Now we're going to look at this blown up over here. Identify this cell. Any of these cells are called hepatocytes. Identify this structure. This structure is a liver sinusoid. Identify the organ or gland. All of this. Esophagus. Identify the liver or gland here. The stomach. Identify the organ here. Small intestine. Identify the organ here. Large intestine. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to identify the layers. Identify this layer here. This layer here would be the mucosa. Identify this white layer. Submucosa. Identify this layer here. Muscularis externa. Identify this layer here. Serosa. Okay. Identify this specific tooth. Incisor. Identify this specific tooth. This specific tooth is called a Cuspid, identify this specific tooth. Bicuspid, identify this specific tooth. A molar. Okay, now we're going to talk about the specific areas of a tooth. Okay, identify this specific area that my hand is covering here. This specific area is called the crown. What is this specific area right here? The neck. And this specific area that my hand is covering at the bottom is the root. So your areas are crown, neck, root. Now we're going to split this tooth open. Identify this layer, the white layer. This white layer is your enamel. Identify this tan layer. The tan layer is your dentin. Identify this layer. Your pulp cavity. Identify this structure here. Your root canal. Identify the structure that would go all the way around the root of the tooth here. Your periodontal ligament. And what is another name for the gums? Gingiva. Okay, guys, that's it on the digestive system, and I'll get back to you with the respiratory system. Hope y'all have a great week.